Grab a seat. Imagine waking up tomorrow with $500 million. But no one, not your friends, your family, or the internet, knows you have it. What would your life actually look like? Let's get into it. You wake up tomorrow morning and nothing has changed. Your alarm goes off. You hit snooze. You shuffle to the bathroom, look at your reflection, and think about what to have for breakfast. Nothing feels different. Nothing looks different. But somewhere in a quiet corner of the financial world, a number sits next to your name. $500 million. And nobody knows. Not your neighbors, not your coworkers, not the guy at the coffee shop who gets your order wrong every single Tuesday. Not even most of your family. Just you, a lawyer you trust completely, and a few accounts scattered across institutions that have never spoken to each other. That is the reality. That is your life now. And the strange thing is, it does not feel the way you thought it would. You always imagined wealth would feel like arrival, like stepping off a plane into warm air after a long winter. But it does not feel like that. It feels like standing in the same room you have always stood in, except now you know there is a door behind the wallpaper, and only you can see it. This is what it actually means to be a silent millionaire. Not the version sold to you in movies or on social media. The real version. The version nobody talks about, because the people living it are, by definition, invisible. Start with the first thing that changes. It is not your house. It is not your car. It is your relationship with time. Psychologist Paul Piff at the University of California, Irvine spent years studying how wealth reshapes human psychology. One of his most consistent findings was this: the moment a person gains access to significant resources, their perception of time expands. Suddenly, the future feels longer, more navigable. Decisions that used to feel urgent begin to feel optional. You stop reacting, you start choosing. That shift, Piff found, happens almost immediately, even before you spend a single dollar. The knowledge alone rewires how your brain processes the present moment. So on the morning after, sitting at your kitchen table with your ordinary coffee in your ordinary mug, something is already different. You are no longer in a hurry. Not because your schedule changed, but because somewhere beneath your conscious thought, your brain has quietly updated its model of who you are. You are no longer a person running from something. You are a person who can afford to stand still. But here is where it gets strange. The silence is not just a strategy. It becomes a second identity. And maintaining that second identity requires more psychological energy than most people expect. Dr. Robert Cialdini, whose research on influence and social behavior has defined the field for decades, documented something he called identity dissonance. It is the internal friction that builds when the person you present to the world and the person you know yourself to be begin to diverge. For most people, that friction is small. You tell people you are fine when you are not. You act confident when you feel nervous. The gap is manageable. But when your true financial reality is $500 million and your presented reality is an ordinary Tuesday, that gap becomes a canyon. You start noticing things you never noticed before. The way your friend complains about rent and you say nothing. The way your coworker talks about saving up for a vacation and you nod along. The way someone argues passionately about a problem that you could, with a single phone call, make disappear entirely. You do not make the call. You nod along. Because making the call would answer questions you are not ready to answer. This is not dishonesty. It is something more complex than dishonesty. It is a kind of protective camouflage that your social self deploys automatically. Evolutionary anthropologist Robin Dunbar, who famously mapped the social architecture of human groups, argued that humans evolved to maintain coherent, consistent identities within their communities precisely because inconsistency triggered suspicion. Your ancestors lived in groups where sudden, unexplained changes in behavior were often a signal of threat. Your brain inherited that wiring, and now it is using that wiring to keep you hidden. The paradox is this: the same evolutionary instinct that once protected your ancestors from predators is now protecting your net worth from social friction. You are using a 2-million-year-old survival mechanism to maintain a financial secret in the 21st century. Think about that for a moment. Now think about what happens to your decisions. Because this is where the silent millionaire's life becomes genuinely strange territory. You still go to the grocery store. You still check prices. Not because you have to, but because the version of you that the world sees still checks prices, and you have decided, consciously or not, to keep performing that version of yourself. Researchers studying lottery winners in the United Kingdom found that many winners continued shopping at discount stores, clipping coupons, and turning off lights in empty rooms years after receiving life-changing sums. When asked why, the most common answer was not habit. It was comfort. The familiar rituals of scarcity felt like anchors. Without them, the person they had always been began to feel unstable. You are not a lottery winner. You did not win this. You earned it, inherited it, built it, or some combination of the three. But the psychology is not entirely different. The behaviors you practiced for decades became part of your identity long before the money arrived. And changing those behaviors, even when you can finally afford to, means changing who you are. And changing who you are means explaining yourself. And explaining yourself means answering questions. And answering questions means the secret starts to crack. So you keep checking prices at the grocery store. And it does not feel absurd. It feels like you. But the pressure builds in other ways. There is a moment, and almost every person who has quietly held large wealth describes a version of it where someone close to you is struggling. Really struggling. Not in an abstract way. In a specific, immediate, fixable way. A medical bill they cannot pay. A business idea they cannot fund. A house they cannot afford in a school district they desperately want their children to grow up in. And you are sitting across from them, knowing that the solution exists, that it lives inside a number attached to your name, and that deploying it would change their life without meaningfully changing yours. What do you do? This is the question that defines the silent millionaire's inner life more than any other. Because the answer is never simple. If you help, you explain. If you explain, you reveal. If you reveal, everything shifts. The relationship, the power dynamic, the way they look at you, the way they ask for things in the future, the way every interaction from that moment forward is colored by the knowledge of what you have. Psychologist Michael Norton at Harvard Business School found that financial inequality within close relationships almost always produces what he called asymmetric social discomfort. The wealthier party feels guilt and surveillance. The less wealthy party feels either gratitude that curdles into resentment or shame that calcifies into distance. Both outcomes damage the relationship, even when the intervention was generous, even when it was wanted. So many silent millionaires find a third path: the anonymous gift, the quiet arrangement made through a lawyer or a foundation, the check that arrives without a name, the opportunity that appears as if from nowhere. It is not deception, it is care, delivered at a distance. It is the only way to help without unbalancing everything. And it works. Until it does not. Because anonymity has a shelf life. Information moves. People talk. Patterns emerge. The journalist Paul Sullivan, who spent years covering the ultra-wealthy for the New York Times before writing his book on financial resilience, noted that the single most consistent vulnerability of the quietly wealthy is not their money. It is their generosity. The trail almost always begins with someone asking how a struggling family suddenly paid off their debt. Someone asking who funded that scholarship. Someone noticing that every time a certain person is in trouble, the trouble quietly resolves itself. You are the resolution. And eventually, someone connects the dots. When that moment comes, and for most silent millionaires, it does come eventually, the experience is described consistently as one of profound disorientation. Not because the secret is out, but because the version of yourself that the world now sees does not feel like you. It feels like a costume that got ripped off in public. You built a life around invisibility, and suddenly you are the most visible person in the room. People who ignored you begin paying attention. People who pitied you begin revising their memories. People who loved you begin, almost involuntarily, recalibrating every interaction you have ever had. This is the hidden cost of the silent life. Not the loneliness, though that is real. Not the constant management of information, though that is exhausting. It is the fragility of the identity you built around the secret. Because that identity, That ordinary person living an ordinary life was real to you. It was not a performance. It was who you chose to be. And when the secret dissolves, so does the version of yourself you were most comfortable inhabiting. But here is the counterintuitive truth that researchers keep circling back to. The silent millionaires who fare best, psychologically, over the long term, are not the ones who kept the secret perfectly. They are the ones who were intentional about the life they built inside the secret, who used the invisibility not to avoid the world, but to engage with it on their own terms, who found meaning not in what they could buy, but in what they could quietly set in motion, who understood at some level that $500 million was not a destination. It was a tool. And like any tool, its value was entirely determined by what you chose to build with it. The philosopher Seneca, writing to his friend Lucilius almost 2,000 years ago, put it simply. He said that wealth is the slave of a wise man and the master of a fool. He was not talking about your specific situation. He had no way of knowing about brokerage accounts or anonymous foundations or the particular kind of silence that descends over a life when a number that large gets attached to it. But he understood the fundamental human challenge that sits at the center of your existence now. Not how to manage the money, how to remain underneath all of it, yourself. You wake up every morning. Your alarm goes off. You hit snooze. You shuffle to the bathroom and look at your reflection. Nothing looks different. Everything is different. And the question that waits for you in the quiet, the one that $500 million cannot answer, is the same question it always was. Who are you when nobody is watching? And now that you could be anything, who do you actually choose to be? That is not a financial question. It never was. It is the oldest human question there is. And you, standing in your bathroom on an ordinary Tuesday with the most extraordinary secret in the room, are the only one who can answer it.